you and LeBron have that exchange. There are people out there that say maybe you shouldn't do that with one of the better players in the game. What were you thinking?
I don't care. He's old.
LeBron James.
Well, he ain't lying. My man old.
38.
That's old.
Yep.
At 28.
That's old. He's still old.
Yeah.
Roaches on the wall, whole blood, send an ass straight lie to me, bitch. I'm gon' lie when you ask me, you wanna be involved.
And so let's go ahead and get into it. Welcome to the Dark Times channel. And before I get started, make sure you guys go ahead and hit that like button for me. And if you're not new to the channel and you enjoy the content so far on this channel, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me as well. And so let's go ahead and get into it. And there's a reason why I entitled this video, The Curious Case of Mr. Brooks. Because before the 2023 NBA playoffs, Dillon Brooks was one of these players that sort of went under the radar. Dillon Brooks was a 6'7" small forward / shooting guard that was drafted in the middle of the second round. But he was able to find his spot and he was able to find his niche on a Memphis Grizzlies team by playing extremely hard on the defensive end, which is something that's rare these days. Not a lot of players have the heart to do it. A lot of these young players are afraid to get embarrassed. And so they're afraid to give maximum effort on the defensive end, especially when they're guarding superior ball handlers out on the perimeter. Now I want to go ahead and chime in on a clip that has sort of gone viral in these past couple of days, which is a clip of the Houston Rockets when they went up against the Golden State Warriors, in which Dillon Brooks once again is tasked with guarding the other team's best offensive player. And this time it happens to be one of the best shooters of all time, Steph Curry. And a lot of people on social media were roasting Dillon Brooks after this play. But if you take a look at this play, and like I said, you understand the game of basketball, and you understand what you're watching and you understand what you're seeing, Dillon Brooks played excellent defense on this play right here. This is not the 80s and 90s NBA where they call traveling and they call carry and all that kind of stuff. And so the ability to be able to stay in front of an NBA player, an elite NBA player, an elite ball handler at that, is going to be limited. I don't care how good of a defensive player you are. It's hard to stay in front of somebody when they're allowed to do any and everything they can with the basketball. Carry, travel, not on every play, but on a lot of plays. Most players are going to be able to get away with a level of carrying the ball and a level of traveling with the ball.
Oh, get spicy with it, Steph. Yeah, Steph, get spicy.
No, not the MVP.
Nobody standing right next to him. Oh,
Stephen Curry.
Stephen Curry.
walk your package.
So this play right here by Dillon Brooks, if you really break it down and you dissect it, not only is Dillon Brooks going one-on-one against one of the best players to ever play the game, he's also got to worry about the screen from Draymond Green on his right-hand side, while also worrying about the step-back ability and the carrying of the ball coming from Stephen Curry. And this is a perfect example of how the NBA operates. If you look at that play, that was a violation. Notice how the ball gets caught on Stephen Curry's hip and he proceeds to dribble it again. That's a violation. But in the NBA, if you're a superstar, that's just another play. But even with all that, and even with the violation, Dillon Brooks still played outstanding defense. That's the best you can play on somebody like Stephen Curry. You got to keep in mind, Dillon Brooks is 6'7", about 220, 225. For somebody his size to be able to stay in front of Steph Curry and make him work as hard as he did, that's amazing defense. But then you go look at it on the internet and everybody posting videos on it, is Dillon Brooks gets destroyed. Dillon Brooks gets worked. Dillon Brooks gets cooked. Because like I said, the average fan doesn't have an idea of what they're looking at. The average fan didn't even realize that there was a violation on this play. They just want to be entertained and be razzle-dazzled, and they could give a damn about any violations. But you know who does see this and who does understand this? Coaches and GMs around the leagues, and players as well. Because when they sit down the next day and they're in the film room and they're watching this, the players are going to know, the coaches are going to know what happened on this play. Stephen Curry is going to know what actually happened on that play. He's going to know he got away with picking up the ball and dribbling it again. He's going to know how hard he had to work on that particular play. He's going to know that Dillon Brooks had to worry about a screen on his right-hand side. He's going to know what he got away with. So that's a good example of the effort that Dillon Brooks brings on a night-in and night-out basis. Everybody's afraid to be a meme. Everybody's afraid to get crossed over. Nobody wants to look bad. But Dillon Brooks was somebody that's smart enough to know that him being drafted in the second round, the only way that he was going to be able to see the court is if he was doing the things that nobody else was willing to do. And so when you're somebody like a Dillon Brooks who prides himself in defense, much like an offensive player who prides himself in being an offensive player and maybe being one of the best scorers in the NBA, when you're somebody like that, you have to take on a persona and have a belief that you can score at will and that you can score on anybody, no matter who's guarding you. And so Dillon Brooks is somebody that took on this identity on the defensive end, priding himself in defense and having that belief in himself that nobody can score on him.
LeBron have that exchange. There are people out there that say maybe you shouldn't do that with one of the better players in the game. What were you thinking?
I don't care. He's old. But I poke bears. I don't respect no one until they come and give me 40.
If you want to be the best at anything, you have to believe it first. It starts with you. And no matter how crazy it might seem to anybody else on the outside looking in, if you don't have that belief, you don't have a chance. That's the starting point.
He's the biggest man I've ever seen. I wouldn't want to fight him.
That's why no one will remember your name.
And so most people that I know, and most people who generally play the game at some level, at a competitive level, didn't have an issue with what Dillon Brooks said.
He ain't lying, my man. Old.
38.
That's old.
Yep.
And 28. That's old. We still old. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they understand the mentality. They understand the need for the mentality. Yeah, you may be considered one of the greatest players of all time, talking about LeBron James. But Dillon Brooks is of the old school mentality. You have to show me. You're going to have to show me. Every time you see me, every time you play me, you're going to have to show me. And so people had an issue with that, mainly people who don't understand the game. And I'm not talking about just the game of basketball. I'm talking about the psychological game of competitive sports and how certain individuals get an edge, how certain individuals who may not be blessed with the same athletic ability as everybody else learn how to get an edge. It all starts in the mind. And so there was people online and people within the media starting to call into question Dillon Brooks' abilities as a basketball player, all because of the comments that he made about LeBron James. And then, of course, that trickled down into a lot of smaller platforms online as well. People were starting to say that Dillon Brooks wasn't going to be able to play in the NBA any longer, and that he was going to have to continue his career in China or somewhere overseas. And so it was a trickle-down copycat effect, all based upon people not liking the fact that this guy had the audacity to criticize one of the greatest players to ever play the game. People were losing their minds. They couldn't understand it. Because like I said earlier, the average fan doesn't have a clue as to what they're looking at when they're watching the game. They're simply watching the game looking for the next highlight, looking for the next crossover, looking for the next slam dunk, or whatever the case may be. But then Dillon Brooks went on to do something that nobody could have predicted him to do in the summer of 2023, in which he led Team Canada deep into the FIBA playoffs and had great success, including a win over the United States in which he had 39 points and went off in that game. And he was without a doubt the driving force behind that team. And if we look at some of those statistics, during those 5 playoff games in which he averaged 18.6 points a game on 57% shooting inside the arc, 64% shooting outside the arc, 85% from free throw line. Now, a lot of people might look at those statistics and say, okay, it's only 5 games. That's only a 5-game sample size. But then we fast forward into the NBA season and we take a look at another 5-game sample size in which he's doing it against the best players in the world.
Oh, passed it up. Nope, stop it. Little sidestep. There you go. Rockets with attack.
And so far during this NBA season, he's averaging almost 18 points a game, shooting 60% inside the arc, shooting 60% outside the arc, and 92% from the free throw line. And so now we have a little bit of a larger sample size. We now have a 10-game sample size that stretches back into the summer. And so now we're talking about a different player. And so to be fair, that was one of the critiques of Dillon Brooks' game. He was known to be a shot chucker. He was known to jack a lot of shots up. and take some ill-advised shots during bad moments. That was one of the knocks on Dillon Brooks.
At this ball hogging ass nigga, Dillon Brooks. What's this shit? Hey, Dillon, what's up with you, bro? Hey, Sharon, what's up with it? Sharon is Karen, man. Yeah, you gotta pass that motherfucker. You hear me? You did that cost us the motherfucking playoffs, bro. You hear me?
And so as you can see, you know, he was a good sport about it. This is somebody that probably looks at a lot of film. In fact, I know he looks at a lot of film. Anybody with that defensive skill set and the defensive prowess that he has on the floor, anybody like that definitely watches a lot of film. And so he's somebody that definitely watched himself and took the criticism. Instead of ignoring the criticism and shaking it off and being satisfied with being in the NBA and being satisfied with getting an $80 million contract, he's somebody that took the criticism to heart and worked on his game, worked on making better shots, making better decisions. And we're starting to see it pay off. We started to see it pay off in the FIBA World Cup. And I think this is something that's sustainable. And I know a lot of people may look at this short sample size and say that this is not sustainable. This is not who Dillon Brooks is. And that's mainly because this is not who they want him to be. But if you understand the game of basketball, sometimes there's a marginal difference from a player being an all-star or from a player being a bench warmer. A lot of times there's a marginal difference. And a lot of times it's a mindset. And maybe fixing and working on one or two things, and that's it. You're talking about the difference of having a 12-year career or a 2-year career. And like I said, Dillon Brooks was smart enough to know exactly what he needed to work on. And he's somebody that seems like he didn't allow his ego to get in the way during the process of that. And so I believe we're witnessing somewhat of a transformation of a completely different Dillon Brooks. I won't say a completely different one, but I'll say a far more efficient Dillon Brooks. And a lot of times when you're dealing with a second-round pick like Dillon Brooks, somebody that had to fight and claw in order to get playing time, a lot of the times, I would say 99.9% of the time, you have to fight and claw in order to be able to crack the rotation and to be able to get into a starting lineup, especially when he was dealing with a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, in which there was a lot of young talent on the team. And so for somebody like that, a lot of the times when you get on the court, you're going to press it a little bit. You're going to press it a little bit too much. And oftentimes it's going to lead to ill-advised shots, especially in bad situations. Because in a team like that, especially when it's Ja Morant, you don't know where your shots are coming from. And so subsequently, a Dillon Brooks is going to try to jack up as many shots as they can because they don't know when the next time they're going to get the rock. And if you can't score in the NBA, or if you can't prove that you can score in the NBA, you're not going to get that $80 million contract. And so I believe that Dillon Brooks was pressing a little bit. He was pressing to try to prove that he could score. Because like I said earlier, if you can't prove that you can score in the NBA, they really don't have a spot for you. Because it's not enough just to play elite defense in the NBA anymore. Back in the 80s and the 90s and even in the early 2000s, you could have a player or two on the roster and perhaps even in the starting lineup that wasn't a scorer, couldn't score at all. But he was an elite defensive player. But since the NBA has changed the rules and the scoring is through the roof, a team can't afford to have a player as a liability on the floor. They need somebody that can put the ball in the hole. And if you can defend, that's a plus. And so I believe that Dillon Brooks was doing what he had to do to try to get that $80 million contract. And now that he's got it, you're going to start to see a more efficient Dillon Brooks. We're starting to see a more efficient Dillon Brooks, taking better shots, being more patient, making the right play. Now that he's more established and he's got that big contract and he knows what his role is with this team, he knows what his fit is, we're starting to see a much more efficient Dillon Brooks. We're starting to see an all-star level Dillon Brooks. And I think it's going to be somewhat sustainable. Now, I don't believe he's going to shoot 60% from the three-point line and become the greatest shooter in NBA history. I definitely don't believe that by any stretch of the imagination, but I do believe he'll probably have his best year ever, all because he's comfortable now. He's got the bag. He was already an elite defensive player. The only thing that he needed to work on and the only knock on his game with some of his antics on court, and then of course his inefficiency on the court. But having a big contract and having some security with a team and knowing what his role is and knowing what his fit is going to lead to a much more efficient Dillon Brooks. And we're going to see an all-star level Dillon Brooks, I think, at least for this season. And so I think that's going to be a wrap on this particular video. Make sure you guys go ahead and comment below in the comment section. Definitely curious to see what you guys have to say about this one, and I'll try to be active in there as well. And as usual, peace and chaos.